Hello, this is Nick from PlanetReport.net, and this is my first video for 2020. I haven't done any for quite a lot of months for various reasons, but hopefully I'm going to start doing some more for this new year. And today's video is all about the terrible bushfires in Australia that have created so much devastation throughout large parts of the country. It's affected, so many people, and so many brave people like firefighters have been killed trying to prevent these fires from spreading. And of course it's had a huge impact and an ongoing impact on the environment and the wildlife of Australia. Now, some of the people recently there's been a thing about climate change affecting the fires, and of course whenever this subject is brought up, there's always other people who sort of, saying, oh, it's nothing to do with climate change, it's a load of rubbish, what you're talking about. And then they'll come up with the reasons. And there's I'm sure you might have heard of him, Paul Joseph Watson. He is used to do InfoWars, and he's made a video all about how it's all lies, climate change isn't affecting the bushfires, and it's all to do with the fact that greenies have not allowed to have fire, they've prevented fire breaks being made and bush clearance and things like that. And also the fact that, seems to be true, is that a lot of these fires have been started by arsonists. Well, that's the cause, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the effect. What is the effect of the climate on the fires? Is this the reason why they're spreading so much? Now, my personal stance regarding climate change is that it's very, very complicated. It's something that scientists use modeling and data, and I find it personally very confusing. And sometimes I don't know what to believe, but I do believe that I don't know what people who spend their lives looking into it know. So I'm quite prepared to, go along and accept what scientists have got to say on the issue. But this Paul Joseph Watson, his video so far it's had over 600,000 views. So it was very, it's hard. He just totally dismissed any mention. He very, very briefly mentioned the weather, and he said it's nothing to do with it. And of course, the differences between weather and climate change is obviously true. The weather could affect it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's climate change. So anyway, it's not just him. There's other people in the media have got a similar stance. And so I've had a look at a few things, and I'm going to go through them in this video. And they're not so much about climate change, but I might do another video about climate change in Australia and how they think it's changing. But this video is all more about just some facts about past bushfires in Australia, and also temperature is the climate changing? Because obviously Australia, being a modern country, a new sort of country, has only got records for weather only going back, well, I suppose it's like most countries, because they didn't have the technology much earlier to record the weather so accurately. But anyway, Australia's records only go back to like the mid 1800s. However, let's go through this. Okay, so it's stating the obvious, but it's obviously a dry and hot country. And I've got some information here about droughts in Australia. In 1803, there was a drought in New South Wales that produced several crop failures. In 1809, beginning of an unusually severe drought in New South Wales, and that continued until 1811. And in 1846, there was a severe drought and converted the interior and far north of South Australia into an arid desert. 1888, it was extremely dry in Victoria, in the northern areas in Gippsland, which I think is where the fires have been so bad in 2020, 2019. At the start of the 20th century, there was a prolonged drought known as the Federation Drought, and by 1902, the number of the sheep in Australia had dropped by nearly 50% from its 1891 number of 106 million just right down to 54 million, because they just didn't have the water to survive. and then wheat crops were almost non-existent. And then so that's not every drought there was. This is just a few examples because there was so many over the years. And then in 1982 to 1983, there was a severe drought with low short-term rainfall. There was large dust storms and severe bushfires in southeast Australia. And on the 16th of February 1983, 75 people were killed. 3,700 buildings were destroyed or damaged, and 2,545 people were left homeless. The Bureau of Meteorology linked this drought to the El Nino climatic cycle. The next one here, Black Saturday bushfires. 2009, 400 separate fires were recorded on the 7th of February of 2009, and fires began on a day when several places in the state of Victoria, including Melbourne, recorded their highest temperatures since records began in 1859. On the 30th of January, the city experienced its third hottest ever day, with temperatures reaching 45.1 Celsius, and it had 3 consecutive days with the temperature above 43 Celsius. 173 people were killed and over 1 million acres were burned, and 2,029 houses were destroyed. But that fire in 2009 was nowhere near the biggest bushfire. There's bushfires have been recorded all throughout the 20th century and into the 21st, and in the 19th century as well. In 1851, 12 million acres were burnt in Victoria. And then there was, again, this isn't every single bush. These are some of the biggest ones, but every few years, there's like 1 million acres, 2 million acres in different parts of Australia. But these are the biggest ones. In 1968, 99 million acres in the Northern Territory were burnt. In 1969 to 70, 110 million acres in Northern Territory were burnt in bushfires. In 1974 to 75, 290 million acres burnt nationwide, 15% of the country's land area. But much of it was in central Australia, and which is so empty, and so it didn't have such a great impact on people. And then 74 to 75, 250 million acres burnt in the Northern Territory, New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, and Western Australia. So that's 250 million acres in bushfires in 1974-75 season. And then 94 million acres in the Northern Territory were destroyed in 2002. So how does the current bushfires compare to those largest ones that Australia's ever had? Well, so far, it's been done on the 15th of January 2020. So far, the Australian bushfires of 2019 and 2020 have destroyed 46 million acres. So, if it's going to go on for another month or so, it could well end up being, let's say if it doubles even, it's going to go to 100 million. Well, that still is in line with some of the bigger ones that they've already experienced over the last 150 years. And going back to this thing about the arsonists and not creating fire breaks because of environmental reasons and clearing bush and stuff, and not looking at the effect of the weather. Well, the weather has a massive effect on the probability and severity of a bushfire. And in 1960s, a CSIRO scientist, which is an Australian research body, I think, a science body, a man called A.J. MacArthur, created a forest fire danger index. And it was made to measure the degree of danger of fire in Australian forests. And the index combines a record of dryness based on rainfall and evaporation with meteorological variables for wind speed, temperature and humidity. So all them factors regarding the weather have an impact on how dangerous it is for fires to spread extensively and rapidly. And the index goes from a low moderate risk right the way up to past 100, which is recorded as a catastrophic risk of fire. So looking at the weather in the last few years, in 2000 2018 and 2019, it was the hottest Australian summer on record. It beat the previous hottest summer in 2013-2014, which was just a few years earlier. And in January 2019 was the hottest ever month recorded in Australia, with an average nationwide daily temperature of 30.8 Celsius. On one day, it reached 48.9 Celsius in Port Augusta in South Australia. The capital city, Canberra, had 4 consecutive days when the temperature was more than 40 Celsius. Noona, a small hamlet in New South Wales, recorded the highest ever minimum temperature. The coldest it got at night was 35.9 Celsius. By July 2019, drought was officially the worst on record in the Murray-Darling River Basin, which is Australia's most extensive river system, and exceeded the Federation drought, the World War II drought, and the Millennium drought in terms of its severity. And in 2019 spring, it was the driest spring since records began, and it was also the second hottest spring, just 0.04 Celsius cooler than the hottest ever spring that was recorded just 5 years earlier in 2014. So going off that, you can say that in the last few years, Australia has had some of its hottest weather out of the recorded years that temperatures and rainfall have been recorded, which goes, I think, back to 1859. So you're talking 160 summers, and you can look at and see which is, and so we're at the hottest. So in terms of climate change, then, well, yeah, it has been hot, but again, I might do another video about it's really confusing when you read all the stuff, and some of it, the climate, the warmist propaganda, that's what they call it. They accuse them of like creating hysteria and just plucking facts that suits their agenda and all this. But there's no doubt that, in fact, one thing I will say before I finish, it does say that Australia continue to be the highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions in the OECD. So it's pumping out more CO2 than any other country per head. And of course, if you burn fossil fuels, what that means is that oil, gas, and coal are all underground, and they're storing the carbon. And when you're burning it, you're releasing it into the atmosphere. So that's the reason behind the idea that that will affect the climate. Okay, so I hope you found some of that interesting. Here's my first one for quite a lot of months, so I hope I didn't ramble too much. And I'll do another one soon. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.